Hi, I'm Elena Vance. For years, my family treated me like the poor outsider, someone who didn't belong at the table. They never saw me. Not really. They saw a reflection of their own judgments, a convenient scapegoat for their own insecurities. But on my father's birthday, the truth came out in a way that made the whole room fall silent. It wasn't a scream or a dramatic outburst. It was a quiet reveal, a moment when the world shifted and they finally had to look at me. Truly look and see what they had missed. It was the night their laughter died in their throats, and my own quiet strength finally had its say. The air in the gilded spoon was thick with the scent of expensive food and hushed conversations. Crystal clinked, silver gleamed, and soft jazz drifted from a hidden speaker. My father's 60th birthday dinner. My mother had insisted on this place, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, knowing full well it was meant to impress, or more accurately, to remind me of my place. I had barely settled into my chair, the plush velvet feeling strangely suffocating, when her voice cut through the polite murmur of the restaurant. It wasn't a whisper. Not really. It was that stage whisper loud enough to travel, intended for ears beyond our table. My mother leaned across the pristine white tablecloth, her perfect smile fixed, her eyes glinting with a familiar cold satisfaction. She touched my arm, a gesture that was anything but affectionate. "Don't order too much, Elena," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern, loud enough that the couple at the next table briefly glanced over. "You know, you really can't afford this place." The words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. They weren't just for me, they were for everyone. For my father, who chuckled dismissively into his napkin. For my sister Clara, who smirked, her eyes twinkling with cruel amusement. For the few distant relatives and business associates who had been invited, all of whom now shared a knowing glance, a quiet, almost imperceptible smirk. A ripple of polite, strained laughter followed, a sound that always made my stomach clench. It was the sound of my family's casual cruelty, a symphony I had grown up with. My cheeks burned, not from embarrassment, but from a familiar anger, a dull ache that had resided in my chest for as long as I could remember. I knew this game. I had played it countless times. The setup, the barb, the public humiliation cloaked in a veil of concern. It was a classic move, straight out of my mother's playbook. I smiled quietly. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile, a secret smile. They thought they had cornered me, exposed me as the poor relative. They thought they had won this round. Like every round before it, they had no idea. They had absolutely no idea who was really sitting at their table. The quiet smile was my only reply. A silent promise that this night, unlike all the others, would not end the way they expected. For as long as I could remember, I was the one who was just there. Not quite good enough, not quite smart enough, not quite successful enough. My sister Clara was the golden child. Her achievements, no matter how small, were broadcast far and wide. She got a B+ in a class. The whole family knew. She got a promotion to a mid-level manager at her marketing firm. Champagne toasts, lavish gifts, and endless praise. Clara is so ambitious. My mother would coo, so driven. She really knows how to make something of herself. And with every word of praise for Clara, there was an unspoken, stinging comparison. To me, I tried. I really did. In school, I studied hard. I got good grades, often better than Clara's, but those were never mentioned. My report cards were glanced at, a quick nod, then tucked away. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, already turning her attention to Clara's latest art project, which was always declared a masterpiece. When I went to college, I chose a rigorous tech program. My parents suggested I pick something easier, something more suitable for a girl. I graduated with honors, got a job at a small but growing tech consulting firm. It was a good start, a solid foundation, but to my family, it was just consulting. Not as glamorous as Clara's marketing genius, not as stable as my father's old manufacturing business, which he had sold years ago. Elena's just tinkering with computers, my mother would tell relatives at holiday gatherings. A dismissive wave of her hand. It's a phase, I suppose. Or, she's still figuring things out. Not everyone finds their path as quickly as Clara. Clara, meanwhile, would beam. soaking up the attention, never correcting them, never defending me. She reveled in the spotlight. And I was content, or so I told myself, to fade into the background. It was easier that way, less painful. If I didn't try to compete, I couldn't lose. If I didn't announce my successes, they couldn't be belittled. I learned to keep my head down, to work in silence. While Clara was busy networking at fancy events and posting her accomplishments on social media, I was pouring myself into my work. Tech consulting was grueling, demanding, but it taught me discipline and problem solving. I started taking on more complex projects, learning everything I could about business operations, financial modeling, and strategic growth. My clients were impressed. They saw my potential even if my family didn't. I saved every penny, lived frugally, and invested wisely. Not in the stock market, not at first. I was looking for something more tangible, something I could understand from the inside out. The idea for the restaurant chain came to me slowly, a quiet whisper that grew into a persistent hum. One of my tech consulting clients was a small, struggling restaurant. They had great food, a loyal local following, but their systems were a mess, their finances opaque, and their branding non-existent. I helped them streamline their operations, build a robust online presence, and renegotiate their supplier contracts. Within a year, they were thriving. That's when I saw the potential, not just in one restaurant, but in a concept, a scalable model. I started small. I bought into that first restaurant, not as a silent partner, but as an active, hands-on investor. I worked late nights poring over balance sheets, meeting with chefs, designing new marketing strategies. I applied the same analytical rigor I used in tech consulting, but with a passion that felt deeply personal. This wasn't just about code. It was about creating experiences, building something real. Slowly, carefully, I started acquiring other struggling local eateries, rebranding them, applying the successful model. It was a massive undertaking, a secret empire I was building, brick by delicious brick. My family, of course, knew none of this. To them, I was still tinkering. I'd tell them I was busy with work or traveling for a client, and they'd nod vaguely, already changing the subject to Clara's latest triumph. Once, I remember trying to share a small victory. I had just secured my third restaurant acquisition, a huge step. I called my mother, excited, ready to tell her, "Mom, I just closed on another deal." I started, my voice brimming with a rare enthusiasm. Her response was immediate and deflating. "Oh, Elena, that's nice. Did you remember to send Aunt Margaret a card for her birthday? You know how she gets." The conversation veered sharply. My news dismissed. Irrelevant. I learned my lesson. Every small attempt to share, to connect, was met with a wall of indifference, or worse, a subtle put-down. So, I stopped trying. I kept my successes, my ambitions, my entire burgeoning empire, a secret. It became my quiet rebellion, my shield. They could mock the poor outsider all they wanted. They could call me unambitious. They could praise Clara to the heavens. While they were busy talking, I was busy building. I was building a life, a career, a fortune they couldn't even fathom. I knew deep down that they'd only care, truly care, when they needed something from me. And that day, I suspected, was coming. My resolve hardened with each dismissal. Every time my father would lightly mock my computer hobbies, every time my mother would sigh dramatically about my lack of a stable career, every time Clara would flaunt her latest designer bag bought with her executive salary, I would just smile, a small, tight smile. They thought they were cutting me down to size. They thought they were defining my worth. But all they were doing was fueling my fire, solidifying my decision to keep my triumphs hidden. I was not just saving money. I was saving my dignity, my self-respect for a day when their words would finally mean nothing to me. That day was closer than they knew. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I was waiting for them to finally see. My life was a carefully constructed facade for their benefit. When I visited, I drove my sensible older car, dressed in practical, unflashy clothes. I talked about my work in vague terms, never revealing the scale or the financial success. I cultivated an image of the perpetually struggling, slightly eccentric tech consultant, exactly what they expected and wanted to see. It saved me from their jealousy, their attempts to tear me down, and allowed me to move freely in the world, building my empire without their interference. It was a lonely path sometimes, carrying such a significant secret, but it was also empowering. I was in control. For the first time in my life, I was truly in control of my narrative. Even if my family was still reading the wrong book, sometimes the weight of the secret felt heavy. I longed to share my accomplishments, to have someone genuinely proud of me, but the sting of past rejections was too fresh. I knew their praise would come with caveats, with demands, with a sudden opportunistic interest in my hobbies. I wasn't ready for that. I wanted them to see me, truly see me, without the lens of their preconceived notions or their hunger for what I had. I wanted them to recognize my worth, not my wealth. But I knew that was a fantasy, a childish hope, so I continued to work in the shadows, my quiet ambition growing stronger with every silent acquisition, every successful rebrand, every satisfied customer. The restaurants under my ownership thrived, becoming popular destinations, and I watched, unseen, as my vision came to life. My team, the people who worked for me in the restaurant chain, they saw me. They saw my dedication, my long hours, my strategic mind. They respected me. That was enough. Their respect, their trust, was a balm to the wounds my family had inflicted over the years. It was a stark contrast to the casual disregard I faced. At home, I wasn't just a boss. I was a leader, someone who cared about their well-being, someone who invested in their growth. They were my chosen family in a way. The people who understood my drive and celebrated my wins, big and small. They were the ones who knew the true Elena, the one my biological family stubbornly refused to acknowledge. And that made all the difference. The waiter, a polite young man with impeccably styled hair, approached our table. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-end establishments. He held out the oversized menus, leather-bound and heavy, indicating the evening's selections. My mother, ever the orchestrator, snatched one of the menus from his hand with a flourish. Then, without even looking at me, dismissed him with a dismissive wave. "She'll just have water," my mother announced to the waiter, loud enough for the entire table and probably half the nearby patrons to hear. Her voice was light, airy, as if she were making the most charming joke imaginable. She winked at my father, who predictably chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through the table. Clara snickered, her lips curving into that familiar, cruel smirk, her eyes glinting with malicious pleasure. The waiter paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before he quickly regained his professional composure. "Very well, ma'am," he replied smoothly, though I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He poured a glass of water for me, placing it gently by my untouched setting, while the rest of the table eagerly dove into their menus, discussing wines and appetizers. My cheeks burned, not with shame. Not anymore. Shame had been replaced by a slow, simmering anger, a hot coal in my gut. This wasn't just a joke. It was a performance, a deliberate act of public humiliation designed to reinforce their narrative of me, the poor, struggling relative who couldn't even afford a meal at a nice restaurant. It was a well-worn script, one I knew by heart, and one they delighted in acting out whenever an audience was present. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted a faint metallic tang. Every fiber of my being wanted to lash out, to scream, to expose them for the petty, cruel people they were. But I held it in. I had learned over the years that fighting back only fueled their fire. It gave them the reaction they craved, the justification for their continued mistreatment. Silence, I had found, was often more powerful. It denied them the satisfaction of a visible breakdown, a public display of my pain. My father, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of the sting his wife's words inflicted, continued to pore over his menu. "Oh, look at this Wagyu steak, darling," he exclaimed to my mother, completely ignoring my presence, as if I had become invisible the moment the water glass was placed before me. Clara, not missing a beat, leaned in to whisper conspiratorially to my cousin about the latest celebrity gossip, pointedly excluding me from their conversation. I was there, yet I wasn't. I was merely a prop in their little play, a silent testament to their perceived superiority. The pain, though familiar, was sharp. It wasn't the pain of hunger or even financial embarrassment. It was the pain of being fundamentally unseen, unheard, unloved by the very people who were supposed to cherish you. It was the pain of 1,000 tiny cuts inflicted over decades, each one eroding a piece of my spirit. I had built walls around my heart, but moments like these, raw and public, still managed to find the cracks. I watched my reflection in the polished surface of the table. A still, composed face looking back at me. No tears, no trembling lip, just a quiet resolve. I gripped the cool stem of my water glass, the chill seeping into my fingertips. My secret felt like a tangible weight in my chest, a counter-pressure to the suffocating atmosphere of their scorn. It was a secret that felt both like a burden and a weapon. I remembered countless similar moments, fragments of a lifetime of dismissal. The time in high school when I won a regional science fair and my mother had said, "That's nice, but Clara's play is tonight. We need to focus on that." The time I got into my top choice university, and my father commented, "Well, it's not Harvard, but it's something." The time I proudly showed them an award for outstanding contributor at my first job, only for my mother to ask, "Are you sure you shouldn't be looking for something more stable? Dear? Like Clara's marketing job." Every single one of my accomplishments had been minimized, every effort brushed aside, every dream treated as a whimsical folly. They had sculpted me into their version of me, the underachiever, the odd one out, the perpetual disappointment. And I, in my quiet resilience, had allowed them to believe it, creating an elaborate camouflage for my true self. Now, sitting there, sipping my water while they ordered foie gras and vintage wines, the facade felt heavier than ever. My mouth was dry, not from thirst, but from the effort of holding back everything I wanted to say. My heart ached with a familiar dull throb. It was the pain of a child yearning for approval, for a kind word, for just one moment of genuine pride from her family. A yearning that, even as a successful adult, still lingered, a phantom limb that occasionally sent agonizing shocks through my system. I watched the other diners, elegant couples and lively groups, enjoying their meals, their conversations. They looked happy, connected. I felt like an alien observer, an outsider looking in on a world where families celebrated each other, not systematically tore each other down. The contrast was stark, and it intensified the sting of my isolation. But then a different feeling began to stir, a slow burn, a quiet defiance. They thought this was their victory, their moment to shine at my expense. They thought they had succeeded in making me feel small and insignificant. What they didn't know was that their petty cruelties had merely forged me into something stronger, something sharper. Every dismissive word, every scornful glance, every laugh at my expense had been another brick in the empire I was building, another layer of steel around my resolve. I continued to sit still, my gaze unfocused, as their laughter and animated chatter filled the space around me. My father finally chose his steak. My mother decided on the lobster. And Clara, of course, ordered the most expensive cocktail on the menu. They were oblivious, basking in their self-importance, totally unaware that the poor outsider they were so gleefully mocking was about to turn their meticulously curated evening completely on its head. My secret, held tight for so many years, was a coiled spring, ready to release, and the silence it would create would be far more deafening than any of their cruel jokes. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just an upscale restaurant. It was the flagship of an entire chain, a sprawling network of fine dining establishments, bistros, and casual cafes. And I, Elena Vance, the woman sipping tap water while her family ordered champagne, was the majority owner of every single one of them. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it, sweeter than any dessert on their menu. This wasn't some sudden stroke of luck. It was the culmination of years of relentless, silent work. After graduating college with my tech degree, I hadn't gone for the flashy, high-profile Silicon Valley jobs my peers chased. Instead, I found a niche in tech consulting for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous. It meant long hours, often sifting through outdated systems and disorganized data, helping companies optimize their operations and embrace digital solutions. I worked weekends, nights, holidays. I didn't buy expensive clothes or go on lavish vacations. Every penny I earned, I saved and I invested. My first real break came unexpectedly. A local restaurant, the Copper Kettle, was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. They had fantastic food, a loyal customer base, but their back-of-house operations were a disaster. Inventory management was manual. Their reservation system was a mess of pen and paper, and their online presence was non-existent. My firm sent me in to consult. I spent months there, not just fixing their tech, but digging deep into every aspect of their business. I helped them streamline their supply chain, implement a digital reservation system, launch an effective social media strategy, and even advised on menu pricing to boost margins. I fell in love with it. The buzz of the kitchen, the artistry of the chefs, the satisfaction of seeing happy customers. It was so different from the abstract world of code. It was tangible, immediate. When my consulting contract ended, the owner, a kind, weary man named Mr. Harrison, pulled me aside. He was ready to sell, tired of the grind. He saw how much I cared, how much I had transformed his business. He offered me a chance to buy in, a small percentage, if I could find the capital. It was a risk, a huge one. My parents, if they had known, would have scoffed. A restaurant? Elena, that's not a real career. It's so unstable. Clara would have laughed. Playing chef, how cute. But I saw the potential. I saw Mr. Harrison's passion combined with my analytical mind and the systems I had put in place. I emptied my savings, took out a modest loan, and bought my first stake. That was 5 years ago. For the first 2 years, the Copper Kettle became my obsession. I was still doing my tech consulting work by day to pay the bills, but every evening, every weekend, I was at the restaurant. I learned every role, waiting tables, balancing books, even spending time in the kitchen, learning about ingredient sourcing and cost control. I absorbed everything. Mr. Harrison became my mentor, teaching me the nuances of the hospitality industry. We worked side by side, turning the struggling eatery into a local hotspot. As profits grew, I didn't splurge, I reinvested. I approached Mr. Harrison with an idea: expand. We identified other struggling, high-potential restaurants in different neighborhoods, places that had character but lacked efficient management or modern marketing. I would acquire them, apply the successful model we'd built at the Copper Kettle, and turn them around. Mr. Harrison was hesitant at first, but my detailed business plans and proven track record convinced him. He agreed to stay on as a senior consultant, sharing his invaluable experience while I took the lead on acquisitions and strategy. Each new acquisition was a stealth operation. I set up shell companies, used a network of trusted lawyers and financial advisors, all sworn to secrecy. My family thought I was just doing well in tech consulting, maybe getting a slightly higher salary. I continued to drive my modest car, dress unassumingly, and make vague references to client projects. It was a delicate dance, maintaining the illusion of the perpetually almost there Elena. The reality was, I was building an empire. One restaurant became 3, then 5, then 10. Each one was carefully selected, strategically revitalized, and seamlessly integrated into a growing, efficient, and profitable chain. The Gilded Spoon was my most recent and largest acquisition, completed just 6 months prior. It was a crown jewel, a challenging but incredibly rewarding project. It had prestige, history, but its management was complacent, its systems archaic. I had quietly poured millions into its renovation, retraining staff, and implementing cutting-edge technology. Behind the scenes, its reputation had soared, attracting the city's elite, including, ironically, my own family. My family, blinded by their own prejudices and preconceived notions, never suspected a thing. They never asked about my actual work beyond superficial pleasantries. They never looked past the surface. They were too busy celebrating Clara's latest promotion to Senior Marketing Associate, a title I privately knew meant little more than managing social media accounts for a failing fashion brand. They lauded her for buying a new luxury car while I was orchestrating multi-million-dollar real estate deals. The contrast was often staggering, sometimes amusing, but mostly it just hurt. I kept it all secret because I knew them. I knew that if they even caught a whiff of my success, their reaction would be one of two things: jealousy, followed by attempts to diminish it, or a sudden opportunistic interest in how they could benefit from it. There would be no genuine pride, no heartfelt congratulations. It would become another tool for them to use against me, another way to exert control or demand favors. I didn't want their tainted validation. I wanted to build something for myself, on my own terms, free from their judgment and interference. So, I maintained the illusion. I let them believe I was still that struggling, slightly aimless Elena. I endured their thinly veiled insults, their patronizing advice, their constant comparisons to Clara. Each slight, each dismissal reinforced my resolve. It became a quiet motivator, a reminder of why I chose this path of stealth success. I was proving something, not to them, but to myself. I was capable, ambitious, and successful, even if the most important people in my life refused to see it. The Gilded Spoon itself was a masterpiece of my work. I had painstakingly overseen every detail, from the new kitchen equipment to the art on the walls, the wine list, the training protocols for the staff. Every person who worked there, from the busboy to the head chef, knew my face, my name, and my vision. They knew me not as Elena Vance, the dismissed daughter, but as Miss Vance, the visionary owner who had breathed new life into their workplace, who treated them with respect, and who understood the intricacies of their daily work. Sitting at the table, listening to my mother's cruel joke about my financial standing, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was the familiar sting, yes, but also a growing sense of power. They were performing their usual act on my stage, using my props, unknowingly enjoying my success. The entire opulent experience, they were currently reveling in the fine china, the attentive service, the gourmet food, it all existed because of me. My years of quiet sacrifice, my countless hours of unacknowledged effort had built this, and they were completely, blissfully unaware. The secret was a heavy cloak I wore, but it also insulated me. It shielded me from their direct attacks, allowing me to observe them, truly observe them, without getting caught in the emotional crossfire. I saw their petty jealousies, their shallow aspirations, their ingrained cruelty, all laid bare. And in that moment, as I silently sipped my water, I knew that the truth, when it finally emerged, would not just be a revelation for them, it would be a liberation for me. I had held on to this secret not for revenge but for self-preservation. Now, perhaps, it was time for a different kind of reveal, the kind that didn't demand an apology but simply stated a fact. The dinner progressed as these family gatherings always did. My father regaled everyone with stories of his youth, embellishing them with each telling. My mother interjected with perfectly timed, slightly catty remarks about distant relatives or political figures. Clara, naturally, was the center of attention, holding court with anecdotes about her demanding job and her latest luxury purchases. I remained mostly silent, offering polite nods or brief neutral responses when directly addressed, which was rare. I focused instead on the impeccable service, the subtle glow of the chandeliers, the hushed elegance of the room. Every detail was a testament to the hard work of my team and to my own vision. We had just finished the main course. The plates, adorned with the remains of expensive cuts of meat and delicate vegetables, were cleared away by a team of efficient waiters. Conversations began to lull, punctuated by the clinking of silverware as desserts were anticipated. My mother was just about to launch into another story about Clara's brilliant handling of a difficult client when the atmosphere in the room shifted. A hush fell, not just over our table, but across the entire restaurant. A tall, distinguished man in a finely tailored suit, with an air of quiet authority, walked purposefully towards our table. He wasn't one of the regular waiters. This was John, the general manager of the Gilded Spoon, a man I had personally hired and trained, a man who reported directly to me. He approached our table with a wide, professional smile. His eyes met mine first, and in that instant, a subtle, almost imperceptible warmth entered them, a spark of recognition and respect. Then he turned his full attention to the table and to me. "Good evening, Miss Vance," he began, his voice clear and resonant, carrying easily across the now silent table. "I trust everything has been to your satisfaction tonight?" My family froze. Their animated chatter died instantly. My mother's mouth, which had been open to speak, snapped shut. My father, who had been leaning back comfortably, stiffened. Clara's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of utter confusion. All eyes were on John, then on me. "Good evening, John," I replied. My voice calm, steady, betraying none of the internal tremors I felt. I offered him a small, polite smile. "Everything has been excellent." "Thank you." John's smile broadened, and he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect. "We're truly honored to have you here tonight, Miss Vance," he said, his gaze sweeping over my family for a moment before returning to me. He then added warmly, almost intimately, in a tone that implied a shared understanding, "Your staff is already aware of your preferences, of course. We've ensured all your usual requests have been meticulously handled." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Your staff. Your preferences, meticulously handled. My family stared, bewildered. My mother's eyes darted from John to me, then back to John, as if trying to decipher a coded message. Clara's jaw was slightly ajar. My father looked utterly lost. The silence at our table was profound, a stark contrast to the comfortable din that had permeated the room just moments before. It was the silence of disbelief, of confusion, of a sudden jarring shift in perception. The carefully constructed narrative of Elena, the poor outsider, was beginning to unravel thread by thread, and they had absolutely no idea how to piece it back together. John, sensing the tension, gave me another small, knowing nod before excusing himself with a final, respectful, "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Miss Vance." He then turned and quietly exited, leaving a vacuum of unspoken questions in his wake. I simply sat there, watching their faces. My mother's perfectly made-up face was etched with a mixture of suspicion and dawning realization. Clara looked as if she'd been slapped, her carefully cultivated composure completely shattered. My father's easygoing demeanor had been replaced by a furrowed brow and a look of deep unease. They were seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time in years, and what they saw was a complete stranger. The quiet, dismissed Elena was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded respect, a woman who was clearly known in this exclusive establishment. The turning point had arrived. The first realization. The silence that John's departure left in its wake was deafening. It was a thick, suffocating quiet, broken only by the distant murmur of other diners and the soft clink of cutlery from elsewhere. In the room, at our table, no one moved, no one spoke. My family members stared, first at the empty space where John had stood, then slowly, hesitantly, at me. Clara was the first to break the spell, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the ringing in my own ears. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Preferences?" she murmured, directing the question more to herself than to me, though her gaze was fixed on my face. "What does he mean, preferences?" Her usual sharp confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a palpable uncertainty. My mother, ever the quick-witted socialite, attempted to regain control of the situation. She forced a nervous, brittle laugh, a sound that grated on my ears. It was a laugh designed to dismiss, to brush away the uncomfortable truth that was starting to seep into the elegant surroundings. "Oh, darling," she chirped, trying to sound casual, though her hands were visibly trembling against the crisp white napkin. "It must be a mistake. They probably mixed you up with another Miss Vance. This place is so busy, you know how it is." She glanced around the table, seeking validation, trying to cajole everyone back into their comfortable, dismissive narrative. But the others didn't laugh with her. They didn't even nod. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was quickly sprouting. My father, who usually followed my mother's lead without question, remained silent, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the dismissive glance he usually gave me. It was a look of genuine inquiry, tinged with a nascent unease. Then, as if on cue, another waiter approached our table, not for an order, but to offer a fresh bread basket. As he reached our table, his eyes met mine, and just like John, he offered a subtle, respectful bow. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. He didn't just place the bread, he treated me with a deference no one in my family had ever extended. He murmured, "Is there anything else you might require, Miss Vance?" before quietly stepping away. My mother's face, which had been struggling to maintain its composure, finally crumpled. The forced smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure bewilderment. Her eyes, usually so sharp and critical, were now wide and unblinking, reflecting a dawning, unwelcome realization. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just one manager. The entire staff, from the top down, seemed to know me. And they weren't treating me like a customer. They were treating me like an owner. Clara, usually so quick to scoff, to ridicule, to turn any situation to her advantage, was speechless. Her mouth worked as if trying to form words, but nothing came out. Her carefully constructed world, where I was merely a backdrop to her brilliance, was visibly crumbling before her eyes. The idea that I could command this kind of respect, this kind of deference, was clearly anathema to her. It didn't fit her narrative. It shattered her perception of her own superiority. I watched them, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. For years, I had craved their recognition, their respect, their love. Now, as it finally dawned on them that I was not the person they had so casually dismissed, there was no triumphant joy, no sudden surge of vindication, only a quiet, almost melancholic satisfaction. The pain of all those years of being unseen, unheard was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface. But now it was accompanied by a clear, cold sense of power. My father, usually so jovial and oblivious to family dynamics, finally spoke, his voice unusually low and hesitant. "Elena," he began, then stopped, searching for words. "What? What exactly is going on here?" His eyes, usually full of a sort of distant affection, were now filled with a mixture of confusion and a faint, almost accusatory tone. He was struggling to reconcile the Elena he knew, the quiet, unassuming daughter, with the Miss Vance, the staff so respectfully addressed. I simply met his gaze, my expression unreadable. I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the cool liquid, giving them time to squirm in their discomfort. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about truth, about finally dismantling the carefully constructed falsehoods they had built around me. It was about letting them feel. For the first time, the disorienting jolt of realizing they had been profoundly wrong about someone they claimed to know intimately. The first realization was taking root, blossoming into an undeniable, unsettling truth. I set my water glass back on the table with a soft clink, the sound amplified in the profound silence of our table. All eyes were on me, expectant, confused, and for the first time, truly focused. This was it. The moment I had held in reserve for so long, the truth I had guarded like a precious, fragile thing. I leaned back slowly in my chair, feeling the plush velvet support my back, a stark contrast to the emotional discomfort radiating from my family. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, deliberately. My gaze swept across their faces, my mother, pale and rigid, my father, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and concern. Clara, wide-eyed and stunned, her usual air of superiority completely deflated. They were waiting. They were finally listening. "I should probably explain," I began, my voice calm and even surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my chest. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word was hanging in the air, weighted with years of unspoken truths. I paused, letting the suspense build, letting their minds race, letting them search for any explanation other than the obvious one. Their expressions shifted from confusion to a dawning, terrifying apprehension. "You see," I continued, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "John and the rest of the staff, they know me because I own this restaurant." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled across the table. It wasn't a loud sound, more like a sudden exhalation of breath from 5 stunned people. My father's easy smile, which had been struggling to return, faded completely, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. My mother's hand, which had been resting on the napkin, trembled violently, her fingers clenching the fabric. Clara's jaw dropped, literally, her mouth agape in an unflattering expression of shock. But I wasn't finished. I wanted the full truth to sink in, to resonate with the full weight of their past dismissals. I wanted them to truly understand the depth of their misjudgment. Actually, I added, a small, knowing smile finally playing on my lips, I own the entire chain. The second part of the revelation hit even harder than the first. The gasps were louder this time, followed by an even deeper, more profound silence. It was a silence born of absolute shock, of a world turned upside down. My father's eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered around the opulent room, then back to me, as if trying to reconcile the elegant surroundings with the daughter he had always seen as merely tinkering with computers. My mother's face was a mask of pale astonishment, her meticulously applied makeup suddenly looking stark and out of place. Clara looked like she'd seen a ghost, her face devoid of color, her usual smugness utterly obliterated. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken accusations and years of accumulated grievances. My secret, nurtured in silence, had finally burst forth, a dazzling, undeniable truth. They had joked about me not being able to afford dinner. And I had just revealed I owned the very table they sat at, the very chairs they occupied, the very walls that surrounded them. I could feel their minds racing, trying to process this information, trying to fit it into their established narrative of me. It was impossible. I knew their preconceived notions were too deeply ingrained, their biases too strong. But the evidence was undeniable, the manager's deference, the staff's respect, and now my own calm, direct statement. The silence was excruciating, not for me, but for them. My family members sat frozen, their faces a tableau of disbelief, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of humiliation. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving them breathless and exposed. Clara was the first to react, her initial shock giving way to a furious, almost hysterical denial. Her voice, usually so composed, was sharp and brittle. "You," she snapped, leaning forward so abruptly, her chair scraped against the floor. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted around the table, then glared at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "That's impossible, Elena. You're just a consultant. You can't own this. You can't own any of this." Her voice rose with each word, tinged with a desperate, almost childish indignation. The idea of me, her supposedly less successful sister, achieving something so monumental, was clearly an affront to her entire identity. My mother, typically the master of social graces, looked utterly lost. Her face was ashen, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. She opened and closed her mouth several times as if trying to formulate a denial, a polite dismissal, but no words came out. Her eyes, however, spoke volumes, a mixture of shock, betrayal, and a deep, unsettling fear. The fear of being wrong, of being publicly exposed, of having her carefully cultivated image of the family hierarchy irrevocably broken. My father, usually so jovial and oblivious, seemed to shrink in his seat. The playful twinkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of profound discomfort. He kept glancing between me and my mother, as if hoping she could magically explain away this impossible situation, to restore the world to the way it had always been, with me in my assigned place. But even he could see the undeniable truth unfolding before him. Just as Clara was about to launch into another furious protest, convinced I was somehow playing a cruel joke, John, the general manager, reappeared. He walked back to our table, his face impassive, but his eyes holding a clear, firm understanding. He knew this moment was coming. He knew the dynamic. "Is everything all right, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice polite but firm, subtly conveying a message to my family. "She is who she says she is." I merely nodded to him, a silent cue. John understood. He turned to face my family, his gaze sweeping over their stunned faces. "I assure you there is no mistake," he stated calmly, his voice ringing with professional authority. "Miss Vance is indeed our majority owner, and not just of the Gilded Spoon, but of the entire Elegance Dining Group chain." He paused, letting his words sink in, leaving no room for doubt or denial. "We're all incredibly grateful to her for her vision and dedication," he added, a genuine warmth entering his voice as he looked at me. "She has transformed these establishments, and we are proud to be part of her team." The truth, confirmed by an unimpeachable source, hit harder than any insult they had ever thrown my way. It was no longer just my word against theirs. It was the undeniable reality spoken by an objective, authoritative figure. Clara recoiled as if physically struck. Her face flushed a deep crimson, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. The shock of being so utterly, completely wrong about me, about her own sister, was clearly overwhelming her. The carefully constructed narrative of her own superiority, built on my supposed failures, crumbled into dust. My mother's eyes welled up, not with sorrow, but with a mixture of resentment and something akin to a desperate plea. She looked at me as if expecting me to contradict John, to tell them it was all a misunderstanding, a joke gone too far. But I offered no such comfort. I simply sat there observing, allowing the full weight of their realization to settle upon them. My father ran a hand through his hair, his earlier casual demeanor completely gone. He looked genuinely shaken, a man grappling with a profound re-evaluation of his entire family dynamic. The casual dismissals, the jokes about my finances, the endless comparisons to Clara, all of it now seemed to hang in the air, exposed as deeply misguided, even cruel. In the face of this undeniable truth, their denial was potent, almost suffocating. They desperately wanted to believe it wasn't true, that there was some explanation, some trick. But John's unwavering confirmation, delivered with professional grace, left them no escape. The truth had burst through their carefully constructed illusions, leaving them exposed and speechless. They had spent years defining me, putting me in a box, and now I had not only stepped out of that box, but I had bought the entire building it was in. And their shock was a testament to how deeply they had underestimated me. It was a silence filled with the echoes of their past judgments, now returning to haunt them. The moment hung heavy in the air, thick with their shock and the undeniable truth of John's words. My family sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of disbelief, embarrassment, and a dawning, terrible realization. Clara looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. My mother's eyes, usually so sharp and critical, were now fixed on me with a glassy, unseeing stare. My father had slumped back in his chair, his jovial mask completely shattered, leaving behind a bewildered, almost defeated expression. This was it, the moment I had anticipated for years, the moment when I could finally unleash all the pent-up anger, all the hurt, all the frustration of a lifetime of being dismissed. I could have thrown their words back at them. I could have reminded my mother of her cruel jokes about my finances. I could have pointed out every time my father had chuckled at my expense. I could have highlighted every one of Clara's petty boasts, now rendered meaningless. I had all the ammunition, all the power, all the right to revel in their discomfort. But as I looked at their stunned faces, something shifted inside me. The urge for revenge, for a triumphant, cutting retort, simply wasn't there. The years of quiet resentment, the burning desire to prove them wrong, seemed to dissipate into the elegant atmosphere of the restaurant. What replaced it was a profound sense of quiet, a calm, almost detached clarity. I realized then that I didn't need to mock them back. Their silence was louder than any words I could utter. Their shame, their disbelief, their sudden, painful understanding of just how wrong they had been. That was all the vindication I needed. It wasn't about making them feel small. It was about finally being seen, truly seen, for who I was, not who they imagined me to be. And that recognition, however reluctant or painful for them, was enough. I pushed my chair back slowly, the soft scrape against the polished floor, the only sound in our immediate vicinity. I stood up, feeling a strange lightness in my limbs. The invisible shackles of their judgment, which I hadn't realized I was still carrying, seemed to fall away. I felt free. I turned to John, who was still standing discreetly nearby, a supportive presence. "Thank you, John," I said, my voice clear and steady. I offered him a genuine smile, a smile of gratitude and mutual respect. Everything was truly perfect tonight. Then I added quietly but firmly enough for my family to hear, "Please make sure the bill for this table is covered." I didn't need to rub it in. I didn't need to see their faces crumple further. I didn't need to hear their stammering apologies or their desperate attempts to reconcile this new reality. The gift of my success, the opulent dinner they had just enjoyed at my expense, while simultaneously mocking my supposed poverty. That was the most powerful statement of all. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer any parting words of wisdom or forgiveness. I simply turned and walked away from the table. My strides were even, confident. I didn't look back. As I walked past the other tables, I nodded politely to a few other diners I recognized, some of whom were clients or business acquaintances, receiving their respectful smiles and quiet greetings. The staff, stationed subtly around the dining room, all met my gaze with a discreet nod, acknowledging me not as a guest, but as their leader, their owner. As I reached the grand archway leading to the exit, I felt a sense of profound peace wash over me. The desire for revenge, for a dramatic confrontation, had vanished. What remained was a quiet strength, a deep satisfaction in knowing that I had built this, all of it, in silence, against their expectations, despite their dismissals. I hadn't needed their approval then, and I certainly didn't need it now. Their silence, heavy and laden with their own realizations, was my ultimate victory. I had chosen dignity over drama, and in doing so, I had finally, truly claimed my own power. Later that night, the city lights blurred outside the panoramic window of my penthouse office. The Gilded Spoon was just a few blocks away, a beacon of light in the urban landscape, a testament to years of quiet ambition and relentless hard work. I sat at my large, minimalist desk, illuminated by the glow of my computer screen. Expansion plans for the Elegance Dining Group were spread out before me, blueprints for new locations in different cities, detailed financial projections, market analyses. The numbers hummed with potential, each digit a testament to a future I was actively building. I picked up a pen, idly tracing the outline of a new restaurant concept on a draft design. The events of the evening replayed in my mind. My mother's biting joke, Clara's sneer, my father's unwitting chuckle, then John's respectful address, my family's dawning horror, their stunned silence. There was no bitterness now, no lingering sting, only a quiet, resolute understanding. I leaned back in my executive chair, a soft, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. The city hummed below, oblivious to the small, seismic shift that had occurred at one of its most exclusive tables. I whispered, the words barely audible in the vast silence of my office. A private victory chant just for myself. They thought I couldn't afford dinner, but I bought the table they sat at, and the chairs, and the building, and the whole damn chain. It wasn't about the money, it was about worth. About proving, not to them but to myself, that I was capable of building something extraordinary, something enduring, something that commanded respect. Their dismissal had been a cage, but it had also been the crucible in which my quiet strength was forged. I had chosen to walk away from their table, but I had stepped into my own, far grander kingdom. This story isn't just about me, Elena Vance. It's about anyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they weren't good enough. It's about finding your own path, believing in your own vision, and building your dreams in spite of the doubts and criticisms of others, even when those others are your own family. The true power isn't in proving them wrong, it's in proving yourself right. It's in realizing that your worth isn't dictated by their approval, but by your own quiet determination and unwavering belief in what you can achieve. And sometimes the most profound statement you can make is simply to show up, fully and truly yourself, and let your actions speak for themselves. If this story touched you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel and share this video. It really helps me grow and create more stories.